starting with Unit 2.3 today, and we're going to start talking about cell reproduction. We'll actually be on page 35 of your notes. So, reproduction is necessary for all organisms to have offspring, so to make babies, but it's actually also important for them to grow. So, cell reproduction is not just about having offspring, but it's also really important to grow, and you want to remember that, okay? So a lot of times we're not just making sperm and egg, which we'll actually talk about later on, but we'll also be making more things like more skin cells or even more cheek cells. A lot of cells in our bodies shed or die after a while, and then we have to make new cells. So in order to actually grow, our cells will go through what's known as asexual reproduction. So reproduction can occur two ways, sexually, and that just means there's two sources of DNA, or asexually, there's only one source of DNA. So today's notes are going to focus on asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, you only have one source of parent DNA, so DNA is only coming from one place, and you actually end up producing identical offspring, or identical cells. So if you look at this picture right here, we can see there's one cell with its green DNA. Eventually this cell will actually replicate its DNA, and we'll talk about how that happens later on. And then the cell actually stretches out, those two copies of the DNA also separate, and we eventually become two separate cells, but with the same exact DNA. An advantage of reproducing asexually is that this doesn't require a partner, so it can occur very quickly. You don't have to use any energy to go find another organism to mate with. A disadvantage is that we have no variation. There's no difference in your offspring. They're going to be exactly the same. Okay? So for our different types of asexual reproduction, remember that asexual reproduction can actually occur, and we'll want to add this in, to make more cells, like skin cells. And what we're going to focus on is the different types of asexual reproduction in order to actually make more organisms. So when we talk about the different types of asexual reproduction, here we're actually talking about how do we make more of a new organism. So this can happen through binary fission. Binary fission is when you have one cell and it divides into two equal cells. Okay? And these cells are actually exactly the same. Our second type is called budding. And in budding, you have a miniature version of the parent that is actually released. So if you look at this picture right here, this is actually a picture of a hydra. Okay? Lives underwater. And it actually will start to grow like a little bud, and the bud will grow and grow and grow, and eventually when it's ready and it's finished forming, it'll actually separate, and this will actually land in the ground and also grow some more. So in budding, you have to think of it as it's pinching off a smaller piece. Binary fission, you're dividing equally, okay, and that's really important to remember that this is equal. But here you're making a smaller version, that pops off, and after it pops off, that will grow and continue to develop. Then we have sporulation, and sporulation will happen with, and you can write this beside the picture, with molds and fungi. Okay, so with mold and mushrooms, the spores are actually little packets of DNA that actually can produce the new organism. So if you ever were running in the forest and you kicked over a mushroom, that powder that you're seeing that's being released is actually the spores, and that's how they reproduce. And then the last type of, well, the fourth type of asexual reproduction to make a new organism is vegetative propagation. And this is what plants use. Actually, potatoes use this too. Sometimes if you leave a potato for a really long time, you'll see a little, not a bud, but it's actually called an eye that starts to produce. And eventually you can even see little stems or roots that grow from that. Strawberry plants also do this, and actually will produce something called a little runner as well. So on this picture, let's make sure that we label it as vegetative propagation. And I also want you to add that another way that this can look is you can have one plant. It will grow a small stem. The stem will actually grow near the bottom. That stem will grow along the ground, and actually a new plant can be produced. And this is what strawberries do. So sometimes when you're growing strawberries, as they're growing, if you ever go to pull them up, you can see that these roots are actually, or these stems are actually attached. Each time the little runner grows down, it'll put down a little roots here, and then you'll have a new little plant. All of these plants end up being identical or clones of each other. So for all of these, whatever the new offspring is, the new offspring, although it's younger, it's still identical to the parent. And then the last type of asexual reproduction is regeneration. And regeneration can happen often with things like starfish, okay? If a starfish loses one of its limbs because it's gotten cut off, or maybe another animal was trying to be part of it or something, this part of its limb can actually be repaired through asexual reproduction. So this isn't really producing a whole new organism necessarily, but it's producing a new part of it. What's really interesting is that a starfish can be cut practically in half, but as long as you have that little center portion still there, you'll actually still be able to grow back even more than one limb. Sometimes 2 or 3 little legs can be grown back. So cell division of your eukaryotic cells actually has a special mechanism known as mitosis, and we'll focus in on mitosis with tomorrow's notes. And we'll talk about how does the DNA move and divide so that it can become 2 new cells. It's a little different with our prokaryotic cells, but we are going to focus on how eukaryotic cells perform this process. For your summary box, I want you to think up of one example of another organism that can go through regeneration to get some part of it back, another limb back possibly. I'm sure you can think of an organism. Write a sentence about regeneration. And then I also want you to write a sentence on why some animals might choose asexual reproduction over sexual reproduction. And we'll talk more about your answers tomorrow.